In the immortal words of Will Smith, summertime, time to sit back and unwind. And yes, for some of us, it is time to sit back and unwind. But for the WWE superstars, summer is one of the busiest times of the year. SummerSlam has always been one of the biggest wrestling pay-per-views around, but recently WWE has pushed it as something even greater. The biggest party of the summer is now seen as a little brother to WrestleMania, and it seems to have been accepted as the second most important show of the year, even though all the cool kids like me prefer the Royal Rumble. Like Mania, SummerSlam also boasts a long history packed with iconic moments. Warrior squashing Honky Tonk Man, British Bulldog beating Bret Hart, and the biggest moment of all, Jon Stewart costing Cena the WWE Championship. So it only feels right to give SummerSlam the same treatment as we have for WrestleMania, the Rumble, and Survivor Series, ranking each of the events from worst to best. It might just be the nice weather putting all of us in a good mood, but it seems as though SummerSlam is actually the most consistent of the big four, with a good percentage of this list well worth a rewatch. How fun. So without any further ado, grab some sunscreen, pack your beach towel, and watch this video the same way you watch all of our videos. Alone in your room at 3 AM, covered in crumbs and sweat and shame. I'm Adam Pachisi from Cultaholic.com, and this is every SummerSlam ranked from worst to best. Join us! Number 30, SummerSlam 1993. One of the most frustrating things in wrestling is when the babyface wins a title match by countout or DQ and celebrates as if they've just won the belt. Thankfully, we don't see too many examples in modern wrestling, but the 80s and early 90s are full of them. One such celebration happened in the main event of SummerSlam 93, and it was very silly indeed. Having knocked Yokozuna out of the ring with a big forearm and attacked the dastardly Jim Cornette, Lex Luger saw the WWF champion counted out of the match. Instead of showing frustration at failing to win the title, Luger instead celebrated. And this wasn't any normal celebration. This was an all-American, red, white, and blue, balloon-filled celebration with several members of the locker room coming out to prance around with him. So yes, SummerSlam 93 ended in annoying fashion, but at least we had Undertaker versus Giant Gonzalez to enjoy on the undercard. That match went about as well as expected. Elsewhere, Shawn Michaels defended his Intercontinental Championship against Mr. Perfect, another title match ending in a countout, and Bret Hart put Jerry Lawler in the sharpshooter for 3.5 minutes. 3.5 minutes. Number 29, SummerSlam 2010. This pay-per-view should have been the high point of the Nexus angle, the moment where Wade Barrett staked his claim to become the first ever English WWE champion. Instead, things went a little bit differently. The main event saw the Nexus take on Team Cena and Friends in a 7-on-7 elimination match. For the record, Cena and Friends consisted of the best wrestler in the world, John Cena, Chris Jericho, Edge, John Morrison, R-Truth, Bret Goddamn Hart, and a spooky mystery man. It turned out to be Daniel Bryan. That's quite a collection of talent, and it would surely make Nexus look strong once they picked up the win. Instead, Cena overcame 2-on-1 odds and a DDT on the concrete floor to win on his own. The match itself was decent, but the booking was, let's say, questionable. The bad booking sadly spilled over into the rest of the show. Big Show beat the popular Straight Edge Society in a 3-on-1 handicap match, while Sheamus fought Randy Orton for 20 minutes over the WWE Championship before getting himself disqualified for trying to bring a chair into the ring. What a silly Billy. Number 28, SummerSlam 1990. SummerSlam 1990 was, in the immortal words of Will Smith, in West Philadelphia, born and raised. Yes, this show took place in Philly, but sadly couldn't be described as chilling out, maxing, relaxing, all cool. The card was stacked with big matchups: Warrior versus Rude, Hogan versus Earthquake, Savage versus Dusty, but none of them truly delivered. A nice way of describing this show is like cutting open a delicious birthday cake to find it full of coleslaw. Some of the best pay-per-views have exciting finish after exciting finish, but the finishes here were less than amazing. In the main event, the Ultimate Warrior beat Rick Rude in a cage match by hitting him with a gorilla press, then taking his sweet time escaping to victory. Hogan defeated Earthquake via countout, another lovely countout, and Randy Savage defeated Dusty Rhodes by hitting him with Sherry's purse. In fairness, Dusty was probably distracted by the fact that Ted DiBiase bought his valet Sapphire before the match. That's uncomfortable on various levels. Number 27, SummerSlam 2007. Like a pair of tectonic plates destined to slowly smash into one another over the course of millennia, John Cena and Randy Orton done an awful lot of wrestling together. Cena versus Orton has become something of a running joke on the wacky old internet, but their meeting at SummerSlam 2007 was actually their first singles match on pay-per-view. Even more surprisingly, it was probably the highlight of the show. Yes, this was prime Super Cena time, and yes, Big Match John picked up the victory, but only after an an entertaining bout between the generation's two biggest stars. Sadly, the rest of the card tells a bit of a different story. The other big title match saw Batista try to get anything out of the Great Khali, the wrestling equivalent of a video game character trying to fight an NPC that you're not allowed to harm. Despite everybody begging for a title change, Khali got himself disqualified and retained the World Heavyweight Championship. One of the best things in WWE around this time was King Booker, which was basically Booker T being loud and obnoxious in a crown and cape. Why does that sound familiar? Sadly, he was beaten in just 7 minutes by a returning Triple H, because Triple H will always beat Booker T forever and always until the end of time. Number 26, SummerSlam 2005. SummerSlam 2005 was maybe the weirdest SummerSlam of all time, and if you look at some of the older shows, that's no easy achievement. Here's a quick rundown of the main things that made this pay-per-view such a downright odd one. Notepads at the ready. Eddie Guerrero and Rey Mysterio waged war in the custody of Dominic ladder match, one of the most unintentionally hilarious stipulations of all time. Everything was set up for Matt Hardy to get a big win over Edge, after Edge literally stole his girlfriend in real life, but Edge absolutely dominated and won by referee stoppage. Undertaker lost to Randy Orton after a fan got in the ring and distracted him, only for the fan to reveal himself as Randy Orton's dad. And finally, it's worth mentioning the custody of Dominic ladder match again, because obviously, it was a ladder match over the custody of a child. Still, at least all of this weirdness was topped by a truly mammoth main event, Shawn Michaels versus Hulk Hogan. Except this match was really weird too. Originally, the plan was to have Hogan win the match, then lose to HBK second time around. Instead, Hogan refused to do so, and the second bout was scrapped. Shawn decided, well, if you're going to embarrass me, I'm going to embarrass both of us, and spent the whole bout comically overselling the Hulkster's 1980s offense. In fairness, it's brilliant. Number 25, 2015. We really struggled to place SummerSlam 2015 on this list because while the action was often very good, the booking was often very not good. The biggest match on the card saw Brock Lesnar and Undertaker face off for the first time since the end of the streak. Remember when the streak ended and we were all really shocked and that guy made a face? This was supposed to be the scene of Undertaker's vengeance, but things descended into confusion at the end of the match. Lesnar caught Undertaker in a Kimura and the bell suddenly rang. The referee turned his back to argue with the timekeeper, and ultimate crowd favourite Taker nailed Big Bad Brock with a cheap low blow before rolling him into the Hell's Gate and forcing him to pass out. It wasn't exactly the heroic victory we'd all pictured, and although it did lead to a very good tiebreaker at Hell in a Cell, they surely could have found a better way to get there. Still, that was nothing compared to the farce that was Rollins versus Cena, or rather, the finish of Rollins versus Cena. I'll not sugarcoat it for you. Talk show host Jon Stewart somehow hurt the younger, faster, larger Cena with a chair to the gut, allowing Seth to take advantage and win. It was incredibly strange. You don't see James Corden running out to help the Bludgeon Brothers, or Conan O'Brien battering AJ Styles with a lead pipe. So why did this happen? In the aftermath, Stewart admitted that as a huge Ric Flair fan, he didn't want to see Cena equal the title record. Essentially, he outed himself as a huge smark, like the rest of us. He was later seen cheering on Okada at Wrestle Kingdom before catching a flight to LA for a PWG show. Number 24, SummerSlam 2017. Last year's SummerSlam was a very top-heavy show, literally. The monstrous four-way main event saw Lesnar, Joe, Strowman, and Reigns bash one another to pieces, and it was very fun indeed. Unfortunately, we had to get through a long and underwhelming pay-per-view to get there. John Cena absolutely buried Baron Corbin in the opening match, a win so dominant it made his infamous bout with Michael Cole look like a 90s All-Japan epic. Okay, maybe it wasn't that dominant, but it was so emphatic it managed to fuel rumors that Corbin was about to be released from WWE. Later, AJ Styles and Kevin Owens somehow managed to not have an excellent match, despite being two of the best wrestlers on the planet. What should have been a North American indie dream turned into a strange roll-up fest, featuring a referee botch, or maybe a botch by one of the wrestlers, or maybe it was deliberate. We're still trying to work this one out, to be honest. Sasha Banks beat Alexa Bliss for a big feel-good title win, but SummerSlam 2017 seemed determined to leave a bitter taste in our mouths, as Rusev lost to Randy Orton in about 6 seconds. Ross still hasn't gotten over it. Number 23, SummerSlam 2012. 2012's SummerSlam was a little similar to 2015's. Good action, but finishes that didn't quite click. Thankfully, these missteps weren't quite as bad. Jon Stewart didn't get involved, for example, but certain things perhaps didn't go the way WWE had wanted. The main problem came after the main event, a very good match between Big Brock and not as big but still quite big Paul. The action was intense and compelling, but the aftermath was very weird indeed. Triple H milked his post-match injuries for all they were worth, trying to drain every drop of sympathy from the crowd. The story was supposed to be that the Game was coming to the end of his in-ring career and his body simply couldn't carry on any longer. Of course, with the benefit of hindsight, we now know that he won the 2016 Royal Rumble and added another title reign to his resume. But back then, it could have been legit. The only problem was, the crowd didn't care in the slightest. They treated poor Paul like a child complaining about a grazed knee, despite the fact that he'd just been brutalized by the closest thing we have to a cross between a man and a bull. I'm talking about Brock Lesnar here, not Mantar. The show's other big match saw Cena, Punk, and Big Show square off for the WWE Championship. Again, the match was decent, but the finish was a little untidy. Show submitted to the Anaconda Vice and the STF at the same time, leading AJ to come down and restart the match. AJ Lee, that is, not AJ Styles. Or AJ Hazard. Cena took full advantage, nailing Show with the AA, only for Punk to take actual full advantage, carting John out for the win and scoring a cheap victory. Number 22, SummerSlam 1991. Before we begin, I feel we should issue a sincere apology for putting the 1991 SummerSlam quite low down on our list. It's an iconic show, mainly because the main event wasn't a wrestling match at all, but the wedding of Randy Savage and Miss Elizabeth. Unfortunately, that doesn't mean it was particularly good. Although, for a show main evented by a wedding angle, you could argue that it massively exceeded expectations. There are a lot of similarities between wrestling and soap operas, but the biggest is that weddings never go well. Although the ceremony itself went to plan, Savage and Liz's reception was ruined by a pair of cheeky little scamps, The Undertaker and Jake Roberts. Jake scared Elizabeth with his snake, which is actually less terrifying than it sounds, and The Undertaker attacked Macho Man with his urn. Classic wedding shenanigans. The show's tagline billed the wedding as a match made in heaven, while the biggest bout on the show was dubbed a match made in hell. That's quite a strange way to describe a 5-man handicap tag team match, but we'll go along with it, I guess. Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior convincingly saw off Sergeant Slaughter, Colonel Mustafa, and General Adnan, another example of the classic America wins ending. Good for popping a crowd in the early 90s, not so exciting on repeat viewing. Importantly, this show was also the scene of Bret Hart's first singles title win in the WWE. He defeated Mr. Perfect in a technical masterclass to win the Intercontinental Championship before heading into the crowd to celebrate with his family, where his dad presumably took him down with an armbar to teach Bret some humility. Number 21, SummerSlam 1995. The fact that a show main evented by Mabel versus Diesel is this high on the list is nothing short of a summer miracle. Yes, Kevin took down Mabel with a big sexy diving forearm in one of the least enjoyable SummerSlam main events ever, but there's one shining reason why SummerSlam 95 didn't earn our wooden spoon. Let's play a really fun game. I'm going to name some of the other matches from the card, and you have to guess which one carried the entire show. Ready? Undertaker versus Karma, Bret Hart versus Isaac Yankem DDS, Shawn Michaels versus Razor Ramon in a ladder match, Barry Horowitz versus Body Donna Skip. If you guessed none of these, the correct answer is obviously Hunter Hearst Helmsley versus Bob Holly. You are absolutely right! In all seriousness, SummerSlam 95 was a little bit of a one-match show, but that one match was arguably the best SummerSlam bout ever. Michaels and Razor went to war in a rematch of their WrestleMania ladder match, with HBK emerging victorious this time around, even if he did throw a little tantrum at the end because the ladder broke and ruined his big finish. Also, we may have included it as a joke entry before, but Skip versus Horowitz actually was a highlight, mainly because legendary jobber Horowitz actually picked up a pay-per-view win. Godspeed, Barry. Number 20, 2006. The main event of this show saw Edge do his best John Cena impression, overcoming the odds in surprising fashion. The Rated R superstar defeated Big Match John to retain his WWE Championship, despite being in Cena's backyard of Massachusetts, and despite the fact that he'd lose the title if he got himself DQ'd. And also despite the fact that Lita didn't seem to know the stipulation and kept trying to interfere. SummerSlam 2006 also saw Hulk Hogan's last ever WWE match, and unlike many legends including Shawn Michaels and Ric Flair, he actually easily won it, against one of the company's top stars, Randy Orton. You can say what you want about that booking decision, but at least it kind of summed up Hogan's career overall, i.e. winning time and time again. In happier, but equally silly news, DX managed to overcome Shane and Vince McMahon, as well as about 50 heels who jumped in to help the boss. Michaels and Triple H managed to fight off the Big Show, William Regal, Finlay, the entire Spirit Squad, and Mr. Kennedy. With all of these matches feeling a little strange and bloated, the best action came courtesy of an unlikely source. Old-timers Mick Foley and Ric Flair put on perhaps the best bout of the night, a brutal I Quit match. Watching it back, however, I just want to usher both men to the back and offer them a nice cup of tea. Babyface Flair got the win with some rather unbabyface tactics, threatening to hit Melina with a baseball bat until Foley gave up to protect her. Oh yeah, Foley and Melina were friends at this point. It was a weird time. Number 19, 2016. SummerSlam 2016 is a good example of WWE's interest in moments over stories. The best example of this was the main event, which saw Brock Lesnar face Randy Orton for seemingly no reason. Vince McMahon may have been trying to take a leaf out of UFC's book, pairing two major stars who didn't actually have that much in the way of personal history. They were even on different brands at the time. However, the match did its job in providing a hashtag WWE moment, albeit one that divided the audience. Lesnar forgot about the pinfalls and submissions, instead brutalizing a prone Orton with elbow after elbow. The Viper was deliberately cut open and left lying in a pool of his own blood. And that was the end of the show. Yes, this show remains the only SummerSlam that ended like a scene from Grand Theft Auto. Another moment came when Seth Rollins and Finn Balor fought over the new Universal Championship. This was a time when the big red belt was more than just Brock's personal trinket, but again, Seth and Finn didn't exactly have the best feud heading into it. The match itself was good, but is remembered for sad reasons, as Balor got injured and was forced to vacate his title the next night on Raw. Still, SummerSlam 2016 was a pretty enjoyable show, certainly the best in recent years. Much of this is down to a blowaway classic between AJ Styles and John Cena. Styles won clean as a whistle, a sign that WWE were ready to strap a rocket to his back. Number 18, 1989. The second ever SummerSlam would have ranked a lot higher were it not for the silly Zeus stuff in the main event. I'm not talking about the ancient Greek god and ruler of Mount Olympus, nor the adorable Disney version from 1997. I'm talking about the fictional villain from wrestling movie No Holds Barred, who decided to get revenge on Hogan for winning in the film by defeating him in real life. So yes, in the main event of this SummerSlam, Hogan teamed with Brutus Beefcake to take on an actual fictional character from a movie about wrestling, and also Randy Savage. Or maybe it was Bonesaw from Spider-Man, because apparently it doesn't matter. Still, there was enough good stuff on this show to make it a beloved classic. Ultimate Warrior defeated Rick Rude to win the IC title, and the Brainbusters put on one hell of a tag match with the Hart Foundation. Number 17, SummerSlam 1994. Like SummerSlam 89, this was another interesting undercard held back by a silly main event. Bret and Owen Hart's feud continued with an absolutely epic cage match for the WWF Championship, and even though Bret picked up the victory, Owen kept the rivalry going. He and Jim Neidhart locked themselves inside the cage with Bret and beat him down NWA style, while the rest of the Hart family tried desperately to climb in. That was great, as was Razor Ramon and Diesel's clash for the IC title, but let me tell you what wasn't great about SummerSlam 1994. Undertaker versus Undertaker. I'll try to keep this as brief as possible. Taker lost a ridiculous casket match to Yokozuna at the Royal Rumble, and his spirit went up to heaven. Months later, Ted DiBiase brought him back, but Paul Bearer said, "Nah, sister, that Undertaker is a fake." Bearer then brought back the real Undertaker, and it built to a match between the two. Leslie Nielsen was also involved, which sounds like a joke, but honestly isn't. Anyway, real Undertaker beat fake Undertaker, or Fundertaker, and reclaimed his place on the roster. Goths everywhere rejoiced. Number 16, SummerSlam 2011. If you know anything about SummerSlam 2011, you might be surprised to see it rank this high. It's commonly remembered as the place where the Summer of Punk went off the rails. Punk and Cena clashed in the main event, a rematch of their legendary Money in the Bank encounter to decide the undisputed champion. It was good, although it suffered from a dodgy ending, as special referee Triple H countered a pinfall for Punk despite Cena's foot being under the ropes. Then, as if a random number generator was behind WWE's booking, Kevin Nash hit
hit the ring and attacked Punk. This allowed Alberto Del Rio to cash in his Money in the Bank briefcase to rob the hottest angle in years of all of its momentum. Eventually, the Summer of Punk somehow became Nash vs Triple H, and SummerSlam 2011 was the starting point. Thankfully, other parts of the show were pretty damn good. Randy Orton and Christian met in no-holds-barred action, a wonderful addition to their excellent feud. Wade Barrett and Daniel Bryan put on a decent contest, as did all of the members of the opening six-man tag bout. Kofi, Mysterio, and John Morrison were all on the same team. It was very springy. Number 15, SummerSlam 2004. If SummerSlam 2004 was a meal, it would be an absolute assault on the taste buds. There were a lot of tonal shifts throughout the night, but even though some matches weren't as strong as others, it still made for a nicely varied pay-per-view. Early on, Kane and Matt Hardy clashed in the infamous Till Death Do Us Part match, where the stipulation literally decided whether Lita would be forced to marry Kane or not. Spoiler alert, she was. Kurt Angle and Eddie Guerrero put on a decent match, and by decent I mean probably very good, but everybody kind of expected a 12-star classic out of two of the greatest of all time, so it's hard not to be a tiny bit disappointed. Undertaker tried to end JBL's SmackDown reign of terror, but the champ deliberately got himself disqualified. It was perhaps the low point of the night, but Taker at least got a measure of revenge, chokeslamming JBL through the roof of his own limousine. In a great main event, Randy Orton beat Chris Benoit to become the youngest ever WWE champion. He was 24 at the time, which is younger than even Jack the Jobber. Seriously. Number 14, SummerSlam 1997. We've talked about one-match shows on these rankings before, but SummerSlam 97 could be seen as a two-match show. Not an actual show with two matches, although I'd quite like to see Triple H get experimental and have NXT TakeOver duality. There'd be two rings side by side with two matches going on at all times, and I'm getting ahead of myself. Sorry. The main event of SummerSlam 97 was Bret Hart versus The Undertaker, with Bret's hated rival Shawn Michaels as special guest referee. Amazingly, the Hitman triumphed, with HBK reluctantly counting the pinfall to hand his nemesis the WWF Championship. That's great storytelling, and the previous bout may have been remembered as just as good were it not for a horrific injury. Yes, this was the match where Steve Austin broke his neck. He and Owen Hart put on a crisp 15-minute display, but everything went wrong courtesy of a botched piledriver. Austin still had to win, otherwise the stipulation meant that he would have to kiss Owen's lovely little bottom. Stone Cold bravely crawled over and rolled Owen up for a 3, but his career was drastically shortened as a result. The undercard was largely not so great, but if you desperately want to check out an aging Legion of Doom versus the Godwins, then be my guest. Number 13, SummerSlam 1996. This SummerSlam really could have been much higher on this list, but fell short of potential. The main event between Shawn Michaels and Vader was excellent, but is sadly more remembered for HBK's tantrum towards the end. No matter how great HBK is, you have to admit that he ruined our immersion slightly. Infuriated at Vader forgetting to move out of the way of an elbow drop, Michaels landed straight on his feet, bent over, and screamed "Move!" in the Giant's face. That's not really how wrestlers usually react, Shawn. Elsewhere, Mankind and Undertaker clashed in a boiler room brawl. It was hardly a classic, but also sort of was. Yes, it was clumsy, but this bout can also be seen as a pioneer. It set the tone for WWF's increased interest in brawling and hardcore stipulations over the next few years, and gave a rougher edge that many wrestling fans wouldn't have experienced before. Sadly, for all the good on this card, there was also a lot of clutter. For example, Jake Roberts and Jerry Lawler may have put on an amazing bout in the 80s, but 1996 probably wasn't the right time. We were also treated to a 4-way elimination match for the tag titles between the Smoking Guns, the Body Donners, the Godwins, and the New Rockers. Just saying that sentence makes me need a lie down. Number 12, SummerSlam 2009. This show was a real mixed bag, but thankfully the good outweighed the bad. Punk and Jeff Hardy stole the show with a TLC title match, one which saw Punk win the World Heavyweight Championship to end the night. Or almost end the night, as Undertaker appeared to chokeslam the straight-edge savior and announce himself as the new challenger. Not only did SummerSlam 2009 have a good ending, it also featured a great opener between Dolph Ziggler and Rey Mysterio. A third excellent match came in the form of DX versus Legacy, and has anybody noticed that Triple H might be the greatest tag team wrestler of all time? His match with Austin against Benoit and Jericho was amazing, as was the WrestleMania 34 bout with Ronda Rousey. Then there's the bouts between the Shield and the Reformed Evolution. Triple H is the greatest tag wrestler ever. How have we never noticed this? The show's semi-main event was sadly not so good, as Orton and Cena clashed in a rather overbooked mess. Also, Christian versus William Regal, one of the most mouth-watering prospects on paper, lasted a mere 8 seconds. Number 11, SummerSlam 2008. Although not the most spectacular show ever, SummerSlam 2008 was one of those pay-per-views where everybody seems determined to do a good job. It's quite heartwarming, really, or as heartwarming as a show can be that featured Chris Jericho punching Shawn Michaels' wife in the face. There were lots of candidates for this event's MVP. Edge and Undertaker clashed clashed in an occasionally terrifying Hell in a Cell match, Batista and John Cena packed a ton of action into 13 minutes, Punk retained the World Heavyweight title against JBL, but I think I'm going to have to highlight the best tag team wrestler in the world, Triple H, who somehow managed to drag a not terrible match out of the Great Khali. It's a shame that we have to leave this SummerSlam out of the top 10, as it's an ambitious and enjoyable show. Still, we thought there were 10 better. Let's take a look. Number 10, SummerSlam 1999. Like me on a Friday night, SummerSlam 99 was chaotic but fun. In the heart of the Attitude Era, WWF delivered a wild card from top to bottom, featuring several exciting matches. It's mainly remembered for a gigantic main event, pitting WWF champion Steve Austin against Triple H and Mankind, with the beloved underdog pulling out an unlikely victory. The game would end up winning the title the following night on Raw, but Foley won here to send the crowd home happy. We also saw Undertaker and Big Show team up to defeat Kane and X-Pac, a surprisingly fun tag match considering the odd combination of guys in the ring. The best match on the show, however, saw Test and Shane McMahon do battle in a love her or leave her match. Yes, this was another example of a woman's wishes being dictated by the result of a wrestling match, but the bout itself was an absolute thrill ride. It proved that Shane McMahon could really go, and even though we might be used to seeing him pull off risky spots these days, it was an incredible surprise at the time. Number 9, SummerSlam 2003. This SummerSlam was rowdy and wild, just like the previous one we mentioned, but the action itself was a little more polished. The show is often remembered in a negative light, probably because Goldberg utterly dominated the Elimination Chamber main event, only for Triple H to sneak a victory right at the death. On the other hand, this allowed the WCW icon to defeat the game one-on-one at a later date, so on balance it was probably the right decision. Kurt Angle and Brock Lesnar clashed in a WrestleMania rematch, and this time, unthinkably, the Olympian forced Lesnar to tap out. It's surreal to watch it back these days, now that Brock is basically indestructible, but even in 2003 it felt like a monumental victory for Angle. It's hard to find much wrong with this show. The smarks were pandered to as Eddie Guerrero won a 4-way match against Benoit, Rhino and Tajiri, and the silly fans were also entertained thanks to Shane McMahon versus Eric Bischoff. Yes, even Shane versus Bischoff was well received, although that may have been down to the interference of Steve Austin. Number 8, SummerSlam 1988. It's time to talk about the original SummerSlam. This may have not been a stellar show in terms of outright match quality, but even the cool hip kids of the internet age have to agree that it contained a number of iconic moments. We had Elizabeth removing her skirt to distract the heels, allowing Hogan and Savage to pick up a big main event victory. We had the Ultimate Warrior making a surprise appearance to defeat Honky Tonk Man in seconds, bringing his historic Intercontinental title reign to an explosive end. We had Dino Bravo versus Don Morocco, and even that was alright. On the whole, although the pace of the action may have not aged too well, the first ever SummerSlam has to be seen as a great start for the pay-per-view. There's a reason it's one of the most fondly remembered pay-per-views of the Golden Era. Just a quick disclaimer, that reason isn't Elizabeth's legs, although from the reaction of the commentary team, you'd be forgiven for thinking they'd ever seen a woman before, clothed or otherwise. Number 7, SummerSlam 2014. Aside from one match, this SummerSlam has perhaps been lost in the shuffle. However, just like this very YouTube channel, it was a very consistent show underpinned by 4 key factors. I'm going to compare each of the show's 4 best bouts to a member of Cultaholic. Please bear with me because this could get a little bit tenuous. The opener was a great little match between Ziggler and The Miz, an energetic affair between 2 men with questionable dress sense. Clearly, this match is Jack the Jobber. Next, the Lumberjack match featured bitter rivals Seth Rollins and Dean Ambrose. It was chaotic, loud, and featured a lot of people getting hurt. It's obviously Ross Tweddell. Randy Orton lost to Roman Reigns in the penultimate match of the night, and it was before everybody didn't like Roman very much, so his victory was actually a very well-received one. I'm going to draw a parallel between this match and myself, because in the office, I also demand that everybody refers to me as the Big Dog. Finally, the main event, in which Brock Lesnar crushed the dreams of not only John Cena, but his legions of young fans around the world. It's as if utter despair and anger was manifested in a wrestling match, and for that reason, it's represented here by Sam Driver. Number 6, SummerSlam 1998. The 1998 SummerSlam was held in one of the wrestling world's classic venues, Madison Square Garden. Fittingly, it was also a classic show, featuring a huge main event, a couple of wacky stipulations, and one of the best SummerSlam matches ever. X-Pac and Jeff Jarrett helped each other to one of the best matches of either man's career, although unfortunately for Double J, it resulted in him losing his hair. The night's other big stipulation was the infamous Lion's Den match between Ken Shamrock and Owen Hart, which sounds ludicrous on paper, but was actually quite fun in an off-kilter kind of way, even if it did take place in a teeny tiny MMA cage. Austin vs. Undertaker clashed in the main event, and although it maybe wasn't the best SummerSlam closer ever, it was still an unquestionably huge matchup. Austin retained, and everybody went home happy. That just leaves Triple H versus The Rock in a ladder match, one of the best SummerSlam bouts of all time, and the beginning of both men's rise to megastar status. It's rare that you see two future greats put on a classic years before their peak, but that's exactly what happened here. Number 5, SummerSlam 2001. Wait, SummerSlam 2001? Wasn't that during the invasion angle? Yes it was, but calm down, because despite happening in the midst of one of wrestling's biggest blown opportunities, it was still an excellent show. Austin and Angle put on maybe the best match ever to end in a deliberate DQ, as Stone Cold couldn't take the Olympians' intensity. It may have been frustrating not to see a title change, but nobody could deny the quality of action on display. To send everybody home happy, The Rock beat Booker T to become WCW champion, a title reign that sounds like it came straight out of somebody's 2K universe mode. RVD and Jeff Hardy attempted to seriously hurt one another and themselves in a very entertaining ladder match, and Lance Storm took Edge to school in a great opener. By the way, by took Edge to school, I mean lost the IC title to him in 10 minutes, but it sounded cool. Number 4, SummerSlam 2000. In parts, this show ranks up there with the most intense action ever seen at a SummerSlam. Unfortunately, it also provided us with bouts such as the Cat vs. Terry in a Stinkface match, so you can see why it just missed out on the top 3. But now onto the good stuff. The Rock, Triple H and Kurt Angle clashed in a huge triple threat match, one which saw the announce table famously give way before Angle was pedigreed onto it. Kurt was legitimately knocked loopy, but was guided through the match by the excellent work of his opponents, and Rock was eventually able to retain the WWF Championship. The undercard was almost unnecessarily stacked, with the likes of the first ever TLC match, a technical 2 out of 3 falls classic between Jericho and Benoit, and the famous Shane McMahon fall from the side of the Tron. Although a rough and imperfect show, SummerSlam 2000 remains one of the most high-octane pay-per-views of the Attitude Era. Number 3, SummerSlam 1992. Cups of tea, red buses, Weatherspoons, sarcasm. That's right, it's time to take a trip to jolly old England for WWE's only major pay-per-view in the UK. Unless you count Insurrection or Rebellion as a major pay-per-view, and if you do, you might want to take a good hard look in the mirror, you weirdo. Although perhaps not as consistent as the other top-tier SummerSlams on this list, 92 remains a beloved pay-per-view for various reasons. The most obvious, of course, is my favourite match, Bret Hart versus the British Bulldog for the Intercontinental Championship. It remains one of the most important moments in British wrestling history, and the pop when Bulldog trapped Bret for the pinfall is one of the most overwhelming of all time. We also saw Savage and Warrior do battle, with Ric Flair and Mr. Perfect stirring up trouble on the outside like a pair of mischievous schoolboys. Shawn Michaels and Rick Martel did battle in an entertaining heel-off, with both men fighting over Sensational Sherry and getting each other counted out. The rest of the card was admittedly quite average, but few shows are as iconic as this one, especially topped off with one of the most heartily received victories in wrestling history. Number 2, SummerSlam 2013. Some of the best SummerSlams of all time have been chaotic affairs, hiding any potential weaknesses with balls-to-the-wall action. 2013's edition is the very opposite, a nicely paced, incredibly consistent show with no major flaws. It's like a perfectly smooth pebble, which doesn't sound very exciting, but that's just my poor choice of words. That's not to say that this show wasn't hard-hitting. Just ask CM Punk and Brock Lesnar, who really laid into each other in a long, no-disqualification match, probably one of the best in SummerSlam history. The main event was, fortunately, another of the best in SummerSlam history, as Daniel Bryan picked up the biggest win of his career so far, defeating John Cena to become WWE champion for the first time. Then, a cruel twist straight out of Game of Thrones, as special guest referee turned heel. He booted Bryan in the gut, nailed him with the pedigree, and allowed Randall Keith Orton to saunter out and take the title from him. At least as he lay on the canvas, his dream wrenched from him before it had even begun, Bryan could take comfort from the wise words of Will Smith. Na 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 na. Na 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 na. Getting jiggy with it. Number 1, SummerSlam 2002. Here we go, it's time to end the list with, in our opinion, the best SummerSlam of all time. This event really shows off WWE's stacked roster following the death of WCW and ECW. It's a massive lineup featuring the likes of Edge vs Eddie Guerrero, RVD vs Benoit, Angle vs Mysterio, and Flair vs Jericho. And if that wasn't enough, the show was closed by two hugely important bouts for very different reasons. First, we have the epic street fight between former friends Triple H and Shawn Michaels, HBK's first match since losing to Austin in the main event of WrestleMania 14. Over the course of half an hour, the pair battered and bloodied one another, momentum swinging back and forth, but eventually, to the delight of just about everyone, Michaels was able to emerge victorious. From an incredibly close contest to a shockingly straightforward one, the main event saw Brock Lesnar snatch the torch from The Rock with brutal simplicity. The next big thing dominated the early stages of the match, and even though Rock fought his way back into it, there was no stopping the sheer power of his young opponent. Paul Heyman even took a rock bottom through the announce table, which is a lovely little bonus. So there you have it. That's our ranking of every single SummerSlam from worst to best. Leave your thoughts in the comments section below, and to all of our English fans, please don't be too cross that 1992 didn't top the list. I've been Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic.com, and you can follow me on Twitter here. If you enjoy what we do here at Cultaholic, you can pledge to our Patreon. That's patreon.com/Cultaholic. And most importantly, don't forget to hit subscribe, enjoy SummerSlam, and join us.